Look, I'm not gonna sugarcoat this because honestly, I'm done pretending everything was my fault. I'm Kendall, I'm 33, and yeah, I'm divorced. And before you start judging me, let me tell you exactly how this whole mess went down, because everyone's acting like I'm some kind of monster, when really, I was just being realistic about what I wanted. So here's the thing about Randy. He wasn't supposed to be forever, you know? I met him when I was 25 and had just finished dealing with a string of guys who were all talk and no commitment. Randy was 22 when we met, fresh out of college working some entry-level tech position. But here's what caught my attention. He was completely smitten with me from day one. This guy looked at me like I was some kind of goddess who had descended from heaven just for him. And let me be clear, I knew exactly what I was doing when I started dating him. Randy was safe. He was the kind of guy who would never cheat, never leave, never give me any real problems. He had zero game with women, which meant I didn't have to worry about competition. Plus, he made decent money and actually wanted to get married. I tested him early on. I'd show up 30 minutes late to our dates just to see what he'd do. He'd just smile and say, "No problem." Like it was totally normal. I'd cancel plans last minute when something better came up, and he'd just reschedule without complaining. It was honestly refreshing to be with someone who didn't give me attitude about every little thing. The best part was how eager he was to please me. Randy would literally drop everything if I needed something. It was like having a personal assistant who was also sleeping with me. And honestly, after dealing with selfish guys for years, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. But there were things that annoyed me too. Randy wanted to know everything about my day, my friends, my plans. At first I thought it was sweet, but then it started feeling clingy. When I'd tell him he was being too needy, he'd apologize and back off. Which was good because I hate when guys get defensive about legitimate feedback. The proposal happened after we'd been together for 2 years. Randy planned this whole elaborate thing at some fancy restaurant. And honestly, even in that moment, I remember thinking, well, this is happening now. I said yes, because Randy was everything I thought I wanted in a husband. Stable, devoted, financially secure, and completely committed to making me happy. But even at our wedding, I found myself looking around, wondering if this was really it for me. Was I really going to spend the next 50 years with someone who asked permission before buying new shoes? Someone who got excited about grocery shopping together? Randy was exactly who I thought he was. Predictable, safe, and completely devoted to me. And at 25, that seemed like everything I wanted. But by the time we'd been married for a year, I started realizing that predictable and safe might not be enough for the next 40 years of my life. 2 years into marriage, I brought up opening our relationship. I framed it as wanting to explore and grow, but honestly, I was already eyeing other men and felt trapped by monogamy. Randy looked at me like I'd suggested we burn the house down. He immediately jumped to all these worst-case scenarios and started acting like I was asking him to share me with random strangers. I spent months wearing him down with articles, therapy sessions, and emotional manipulation. I knew Randy was too inexperienced and insecure to find other partners while I could easily line up dates. My confidence proved right. I had multiple options within hours of updating my dating profile, while Randy got maybe 3 matches in the first month. I felt validated watching him struggle while I had men lining up to take me out. I'd come home from amazing dates and check in with Randy, knowing it tortured him but framing it as healthy communication. He'd try to hide his pain and put on a brave face, which honestly just made me feel superior. The guy who really caught my attention was Marcus. He was everything Randy wasn't. Confident, spontaneous, a little bit dangerous. Marcus worked in sales, was always traveling, living this exciting life that seemed so glamorous compared to Randy's routine of work, gym, home, repeat. When Marcus told stories about his adventures, I found myself hanging on every word. Marcus also didn't treat me like I was made of glass. If I was running late, he'd tease me about it instead of just accepting it. It was like verbal sparring, and I loved every minute of it. With Randy, conversations were always so careful and considerate. With Marcus, they were electric. I started looking forward to my dates with Marcus more than anything else in my week. We'd meet at cool bars I'd never been to, places that felt sophisticated and adult in a way that my marriage to Randy never did. Marcus would order wine for both of us without asking what I wanted. And somehow he always picked exactly what I was in the mood for. Randy noticed the change in me, of course. I was happier, more energetic, more interested in intimacy when I came home from my dates. He kept asking if I was okay, if something was wrong. It was exhausting having to reassure him constantly that my good mood wasn't somehow a threat to our marriage. The hardest part was the check-ins. Randy insisted we tell each other about our dates, so I'd come home and give him these sanitized versions of my evenings while he shared his lack of progress in excruciating detail. Listening to Randy talk about his failed attempts at dating was honestly painful. I tried to give him advice, but the truth was that Randy's problem wasn't his approach. It was his entire personality. Things got complicated when Randy started developing what he called a friendship with some woman from his work. Vivian. Apparently, she was one of the few people who actually responded to his dating profile. But instead of going on a date, they just started talking all the time. Randy claimed it was platonic, but I could tell he was getting emotionally invested. The irony wasn't lost on me that Randy was getting jealous of my actual dates while developing feelings for someone he wasn't even sleeping with. When I pointed this out, he got defensive and said it was completely different because they were just friends. Right? I started paying closer attention to Randy's phone habits and noticed he was texting with this Vivian person constantly. He'd smile at his phone in a way he never smiled at my texts anymore. When I asked about it, he'd get this weird look and change the subject. It was classic emotional affair behavior, but apparently when Randy did it, it was just friendship. Meanwhile, my relationship with Marcus was getting more serious. We'd moved beyond casual dates to spending entire evenings together, talking for hours about everything and nothing. Marcus made me feel like the most fascinating woman in the world. He remembered details about my life that Randy had forgotten years ago. I started comparing Randy to Marcus constantly, and Randy never came out favorably. Marcus was decisive where Randy was wishy-washy. Marcus was spontaneous where Randy needed to plan everything weeks in advance. Marcus made me feel desired and exciting, while Randy made me feel like a comfortable piece of furniture. The more time I spent with Marcus, the more I realized that what I had with Randy wasn't really love, it was habit. We'd built this life together based on compatibility and shared goals, but there was no passion, no electricity, no sense that we couldn't live without each other. By this point, I was basically living two separate lives. There was my life with Randy, which felt like going through the motions of being married. Then there was my life with Marcus, which felt like who I was actually meant to be. Marcus had plans to start his own business, ambitions beyond just collecting a steady paycheck. When I was with him, I remembered that I used to have goals and dreams too. The hardest part was coming home to Randy after spending time with Marcus. It was like switching from high definition to black and white. Randy would ask about my evening in this careful, controlled way, and I'd give him the basic facts while keeping all the important details to myself. Randy started asking more questions about Marcus specifically, which annoyed me because he never showed that level of interest in my other dates. I kept my answers vague because honestly, it was none of his business. We'd agreed that polyamory meant trusting each other to make good decisions. What really bothered me was that Randy was becoming increasingly needy and insecure. He'd want extra reassurance that I still loved him, that our marriage was still my priority. It was exhausting having to manage his emotions on top of everything else. I started feeling like his mother, more than his wife. Meanwhile, Randy's friendship with Vivian was getting more intense. He'd mention her constantly. Vivian said this, Vivian thought that. It was obvious he was developing real feelings for her, but when I pointed this out, he'd get defensive and accuse me of being paranoid. I decided to investigate and found Vivian's social media profiles. She was younger than me, probably around 28, and worked in healthcare administration. Cute in that generic girl-next-door way that men seem to find so appealing. Her photos were all wholesome family gatherings and hiking trips. Basically, she was everything I wasn't. Sweet, uncomplicated, satisfied with a simple life. Watching Randy light up whenever he talked about Vivian made me realize something important. He was capable of passion and excitement. He just wasn't capable of feeling those things about me anymore. The irony was that Randy was doing exactly what I was doing with Marcus, but he was too much of a coward to admit it. I started pulling back from Randy emotionally because, frankly, it felt pointless to invest energy in someone who was clearly investing his elsewhere. When he'd try to initiate conversations about our relationship, I'd give him short answers and change the subject. The breaking point came when Marcus started talking about relocating for business opportunities, maybe somewhere warmer with better networking possibilities. For the first time since I'd gotten married, I found myself imagining a completely different life for myself. What if I didn't have to stay in this marriage that felt more like a business partnership than a love story? I started researching Marcus's potential destinations, looking at job opportunities and cost of living. It felt thrilling and terrifying, and completely different from the careful, practical way Randy and I had always made decisions together. That decision got made for me sooner than I expected. One evening, I came home from a particularly amazing date with Marcus to find Randy sitting at our kitchen table with this weird expression on his face. "We need to talk," he said, which immediately put me on the defensive. Randy started going on about how our arrangement wasn't working, how he felt like we were drifting apart, how he missed feeling connected to me. Then Randy said something that completely caught me off guard. He wanted to close our marriage and focus on rebuilding our relationship. Just like that, he expected me to give up everything I'd built with Marcus. I told Randy I needed time to think about it, but honestly, my mind was already made up. I wasn't going back to that life, not when I'd finally found something real with someone who actually understood me. I started staying out later, spending more time with Marcus, basically checking out of my marriage completely. Randy noticed the change immediately. He'd try to plan date nights or suggest weekend trips, clearly attempting to compete with what I had with Marcus. But it felt forced and desperate. The conversation I'd been avoiding finally happened on a random Tuesday night. Randy brought up the idea of taking a vacation together, just the two of us, to reconnect. And something about the way he said it, so hopeful and naive, made me realize I couldn't keep stringing him along. I told Randy I wanted a divorce. Not because of Marcus, not because of polyamory, but because we'd grown into different people who wanted different things. I expected him to argue with me, but Randy just sat there for a long moment and then nodded like he'd been expecting it. "Is this about Marcus?" he asked. I told him it wasn't about Marcus specifically, but about the fact that Marcus had shown me what it felt like to be truly compatible with someone. Randy and I had built a life together based on shared goals and mutual convenience, but we'd never had that spark. The divorce process was surprisingly smooth, probably because Randy just wanted it to be over with. We hired one of those collaborative divorce lawyers who helped us divide everything without turning it into a war. Randy got to keep the house, and I got enough money to start fresh somewhere new. What surprised me was how relieved I felt once we made the decision. All the guilt and anxiety I'd been carrying around just disappeared. Randy moved out of our bedroom immediately, but stayed in the house until the paperwork was finalized. The one thing that bothered me was how quickly Randy seemed to bounce back. I'd expected him to be devastated, maybe beg me to reconsider. Instead, he just accepted it and moved on, like he'd been waiting for permission to stop trying. Randy's friendship with Vivian became even more obvious during this time. She'd call the house sometimes, and Randy would take the call in another room, like I couldn't hear him laughing and talking for hours. The thing that really annoyed me was that Randy seemed more animated and happy during those conversations than he'd been with me in months. About 3 months into the divorce proceedings, Marcus got the job opportunity he'd been hoping for. A position with a marketing firm in Dallas that would basically double his salary. He asked if I'd consider moving with him, not as a live-in girlfriend necessarily, but just to see where things could go between us. The timing felt perfect. I was about to be officially divorced, I had enough money from the settlement to start over somewhere new, and I had someone who actually wanted to build a future with me. I told Marcus yes before I'd really thought it through completely. Randy took the news about my move better than I'd expected. He just nodded and said he hoped I'd be happy, which felt anticlimactic after 5 years of marriage. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday morning in February. Randy and I signed the papers, shook hands awkwardly, and that was it. Marcus and I left for Dallas the following weekend. He'd already found us a beautiful apartment in a trendy neighborhood with great restaurants and nightlife. For the first few months, everything was perfect. Marcus and I fell into an easy routine of exploring our new city together, trying new restaurants, meeting interesting people through his work connections. But after about 6 months, I started noticing things about Marcus that bothered me. The way he'd flirt with waitresses right in front of me, or how he'd make plans without consulting me first. He'd dismiss my opinions during conversations with his friends. The biggest issue was that Marcus treated our relationship like it was still casual, even though I'd moved across the country to be with him. He'd make comments about keeping our options open or not wanting to rush into anything serious. When I brought up the future, Marcus would change the subject or say we should just see how things developed naturally. The worst part was realizing that Marcus had never actually asked me to be exclusive with him. I just assumed that moving to Dallas together meant we were in a committed relationship, but Marcus apparently saw it as an extended trial period where he could still date other people if he wanted to. I found out about Marcus's dating profile by accident when his phone buzzed with a notification while he was in the shower. When I confronted him about it, he acted like I was being unreasonable for expecting exclusivity without explicitly discussing it. According to Marcus, we'd never had the conversation about being exclusive, so technically, he wasn't doing anything wrong. That's when I started to understand that Marcus was exactly the kind of guy I'd dated before Randy. Charming and exciting, but ultimately unwilling to commit to anything real. I tried to make it work for a few more months, but the magic was gone. Marcus's spontaneity started feeling selfish rather than exciting. His confidence started seeming like arrogance. All the things that had attracted me to him became irritating reminders of how naive I'd been. The final blow came when Marcus announced he was being transferred to Los Angeles for an even better position. When I asked if he wanted me to come with him, he hesitated just long enough to let me know the answer was no. Marcus said he thought it would be good for both of us to have some space to figure out what we really wanted, which was code for, I want to start fresh in LA without the complication of a girlfriend who has expectations. So there I was, 33 years old, divorced, living in a city where I knew nobody except my ex-boyfriend, who was about to move away. I'd given up a stable marriage with a decent man for an exciting relationship with someone who turned out to be just as unreliable as every other guy I'd dated before Randy. Through mutual friends, I heard that Randy was indeed dating Vivian seriously. They'd moved in together about 6 months after our divorce was finalized. Part of me wanted to reach out to Randy, maybe apologize for how things ended, but I knew that conversation would be more for my benefit than his. 2 years later, I'm still in Dallas, still single, still trying to figure out what went wrong with my life. I've got a decent job and a nice apartment and some friends, but nothing feels as solid or real as what I had with Randy, even during our worst times. The hardest part is seeing Randy's life play out on social media. We have mutual friends who post pictures from gatherings where Randy and Vivian look genuinely happy together. And I mean actually happy. Not just performing happiness for the camera like Randy and I used to do. Randy looks different in these photos, more confident, more relaxed, like he's finally comfortable in his own skin. Vivian posts these sweet little captions about their weekend adventures or how proud she is of Randy's promotion at work. It's the kind of supportive, enthusiastic girlfriend energy I never gave him. What kills me is that Randy is thriving without me in ways he never did during our marriage. He's gotten promoted twice since our divorce. He's taken up hiking and photography, hobbies I used to roll my eyes at when he suggested them. He looks happier and healthier than I've ever seen him. The worst part was running into them at a restaurant a few months ago. I was there with a guy I'd been seeing casually, and Randy and Vivian were having dinner at a corner table. They didn't see me at first, so I got to watch them interact naturally. Randy was animated and funny in a way I'd forgotten he could be. When Randy finally noticed me, he gave me a polite wave and a genuine smile. Not the fake smile you give to someone you hate, but the real smile you give to someone you genuinely wish well. His complete lack of lingering resentment made it clear that he'd moved on completely. Vivian was gracious too. When Randy introduced us, she was warm and friendly without being fake about it. They told me about their recent trip to Colorado and their plans to buy a house together. Randy mentioned that he'd started hiking regularly and discovered he actually loved being outdoors. They seemed like actual partners, building a life together based on shared interests and mutual respect. Walking away from that encounter, I felt something I hadn't expected. Genuine happiness for Randy, mixed with crushing regret about what I'd thrown away. Not because I wanted to be back with him, but because I realized I'd never appreciated what we had when I had it. I started thinking about all the ways I'd dismissed Randy's attempts to connect with me. All the times I'd made him feel like his interests and personality weren't enough to keep me engaged. Randy had been offering me exactly what Vivian was clearly enjoying: a partnership with someone who wanted to build a life together. Now, I'm 33, single, living in a city where I have no real history or deep connections, watching my ex-husband build the kind of life I'd always claimed to want, but never knew how to appreciate when I had it. And the worst part is that I know it's entirely my own fault. I chose excitement over stability, passion over partnership, chemistry over compatibility. I convinced myself that love was supposed to feel like a constant high instead of a steady, reliable warmth. I threw away something real for something that looked better from the outside but had no substance underneath. Randy didn't fail me as a husband. I failed him as a wife. And now he's getting to experience what marriage is supposed to feel like with someone who actually deserves him. Someone who sees his kindness as strength instead of weakness, his reliability as a gift instead of a burden. I can't even be angry about it because they both deserve their happiness. Randy deserves someone who appreciates him from day one, instead of figuring it out years too late. The only person I can be angry with is myself, for being too immature and selfish to recognize what I had when I had it. So here I am, watching from the sidelines as my ex-husband lives his best life with someone who actually deserves him, while I'm still trying to figure out how to build something real with someone new. And honestly, I'm not sure I ever will, because the problem was never about finding the right person. It was about learning how to be the right person for someone else. But that's a lesson I learned too late to do Randy any good, and probably too late to do myself any good either.